Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us for today's episode of LunchBytes. Thank you. Today's episode is going to be all around sorting your tech debt. We're joined by Keith Howling. But first of all, what is LunchBytes? Well, LunchBytes is a fortnightly live stream where we get the best speakers from the UK at Microsoft to talk around kind of their passions and technology and go that live to the world. So thank you for joining us. Before we jump into today's session, there's a couple of things that we'd like to run through. So in this episode, please be aware of others, be welcoming and respectful, and be understanding of people's differences. Please be friendly and patient in the chat, be open to all questions and viewpoints, and be kind and considerate to others who have joined. If you'd like to see our full code of conduct or report an issue, please go to aka.ms/eventscoc. Now, today's episode is also available with closed captions. So if you require this, please do click that in the YouTube live stream. So I'm Tyg Brennan. I'm a cloud solution architect in the UK. I work in our digital and app innovation area, which is pretty much everything focused around the developer side of things within Azure. So a lot of our serverless platform is kind of the area that I really like to talk about and work with. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Asta. Asta, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Asta. Like Tyg, I'm also a cloud solution architect in the app innovation space, but I focus more on Power Platform and specifically as well UX, which is a big passion of mine. I also hosted the session last time that we had on UX, so feel free to check that out as well. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. And yeah, pass back to Tyg.
Great, thanks, Asta. And so usually we're joined by Annika and Steph as well, but unfortunately they can't be with us for this session. Now, jumping into today's main topic, Keith, I've just brought you up on the live stream. We've got you to talk about sorting your tech debt with Azure. Do you want to give everyone a quick introduction first?
I will, yes. Thanks, Tyg. Thanks for having me on today. So I'm also a cloud solution architect within the CSU, Microsoft. I've been in role for around 7 years, and for the last year or two, we've been a lot of focus on modernizing older application landscapes using a lot of our newer cloud technologies. So whether that be containers in the form of AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service or other services, or modernizing up to more serverless and PaaS technologies. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to come on with Tyg onto LunchBytes and just talk about some of the areas that we've seen around our enterprise customers over the last few years, what type of projects they're doing, and some of the lessons learned. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, looking a lot forward to this session. One of the things just to say for everyone joining us live, you have the opportunity to ask questions in the chat, put in your comments. Please do that. We have time for a Q&A as we go on through the session. Keith's going to be running through some slides and a demo, but we've got about 10 minutes to answer some questions as well that you have. So please do send them into the chat whilst we go live. Okay, Keith, I'm going to hand over to your slide deck now, and so bring you up on the screen, and so all ready for you to take us away.
Lovely, thank you. So what kind of landscapes do we see when we work with our customers who are looking to modernize? So predominantly we see fairly large estates of either classic .NET applications or Java applications. And often these estates are running critical parts, mission critical parts of companies, either digital transformation or core back office systems, or underpinning a lot of what's happening in the organization. So these applications have often been quite successful, and they've grown over time, and they've had new functionality added to them, and they come in all sorts of different architecture patterns, but typically N-tier type applications or monolith type applications. So what we're seeing is a lot of the developer community, they really want to work with more of the modern language stacks, the newer version of languages, whether that be Java or C#, that some of the newer frameworks unlock. The business is really keen to drive innovation faster. That there's more and more demands to create new features, get new features to market, make sure they scale and make sure they're reliable. And these situations often we will come and talk about various different application modernization strategies and approaches within organizations. So what's driving modernization? Typically, we do see this split into two different segments. So more kind of infrastructure or operations drivers, which means there could be end of support software in the stack, or it's running on an end of support infrastructure. There could be security concerns around some of the older stack items that need to be updated. There may be some data center exit policy coming on. But the more application-oriented drivers are mostly about innovation, about the business wanting new features quicker to unlock more modern channels, and just to make sure that the business can keep driving and keep going forward with these application stacks. So as part of the application innovation group, we're really interested and focused on those application innovation drivers and how we can address those. So what are the types of modernization that we can talk about when we're looking at these application estates? So you may have all heard of the 5 Rs of modernization, and that's very much the approach that we take as well. So just to level set on these terms, rehost here means taking really the code base and the source code of what is currently running and moving that to maybe cloud infrastructure without any code changes required. So this is really just a moving from one set of infrastructure to another one to upgrade and make that more flexible. The other options where we get more involved is the refactor or re-architect or replace. So the refactor is about looking at an application and doing what's necessary to make it run really well on cloud managed platform as a service services, PaaS services. So this means making all the necessary upgrades to make sure that code base can run really well. And this could be as small as 3 or 4 or 5% code changes to make that happen if there's not a lot of appetite there to make big changes to that code. Or it could be as much as moving to different types of patterns, doing strangler patterns to introduce new functionality in different ways. So there's lots of different options that are buried in there. And then we get the re-architect, rebuild, which really means that the current code base we don't think is going to meet the business needs moving forward. And maybe there's a lot of legacy in there that doesn't need to be in there, or complexity that can be engineered out. And so there's an opportunity to build a new tech stack, more of a cloud native tech stack to drive that. And so we often go in and talk about how the approaches to that as well. And then lastly, there's replace, which means maybe that application now could actually be replaced by a off-the-shelf SaaS product. So it's not particularly something that's very specific to your business and can be replaced with a SaaS industry solution, or perhaps a low-code solution like the Power Platform, if it can fit in that area quite well. So you can read about these approaches on our Cloud Adoption Framework website. So we put together this kind of quick diagram just to show the broad lessons learned from the portfolio analysis. So it's a bit of an eye chart, but if you first go down the right-hand side here, so we've got a lot of tooling to be able to assess those applications, whether they're .NET or Java, to see will the code migrate to run well on PaaS services with no changes. As I say, Azure Migrate will be able to tell us this decision point. So if that decision point turns out to be yes, so you don't actually need to change anything in that code and it will run perfectly well in the cloud. A second decision point is really, is there a business case for further modernization? So is there a business driver that would dictate that we want to modernize further? And if there isn't any particular business case, if there's no appetite to really crack that code base open and do much further with it, then we can use Azure Migrate to rehost directly to PaaS, which is kind of the easiest route. Now, whether or not the code will migrate with changes, if there is a business case for further modernization, then we go to the second decision point about is the code base fit for purpose? Is it something we want to use and refine and start with, and then modernize the latest frameworks, latest languages as new features come in? And if the answer is yes to that, then we look at the refactoring options for those apps. And if the answer is no, then it's either a rebuild or replace. So it's a typical type of approach. And we have tooling all through this stack to help these decisions. So speaking of tooling, Azure Migrate, you'll find this in the Azure portal. You can just search in the top bar for Azure Migrate. And this is getting new capabilities all the time to discover, assess, and migrate .NET apps, but also containerizing those apps as well into running on those managed services up into Azure. So it will give you an idea of those different options and do the actual assessment. And if there's no code changes either, it will actually do the migration for you. So there's a lot of tooling there. The second set of tooling is kind of wrapped up into our Visual Studio, and also for the .NET side, the .NET tooling that's built inside of this. So you'll see in the demo later on that there's actually now a lot of good new tooling to help you upgrade the code base, to help you assess those code bases if you want to go ahead and do that, to wrap the code with Docker support, to have an immutable, migratable, immutable version of your application that you can then put on any type of machine that will support Docker deployment. Then we also have a bunch of documentation and samples. There's a lot of documentation online that talks about how to approach modernizing these applications. And again, I'll show you a little bit of that a bit later. So just to give you a bit of an understanding, when we talk about refactoring, so if the refactoring approach is something we go down, a lot of the times these types of items will come to the list where we need to look into the code base and make those changes. So just to pick out a couple here, for example, identity is often quite a big one, probably one of the most significant areas to refactor. A lot of the time, if you were using domain joined or Kerberos authentication or authentication on a non-standards based identity provider, we would advocate on upgrading that identity capability to use more of a modern standards based identity provider. And oftentimes we see our customers go to Azure AD for that, and that provides modern authentication, obviously robust password management, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication. So you get the benefits of all of these things if you implement those modern auth libraries. Another piece could be the monitoring frameworks, whereas previously we could come across solutions that are monitoring into an OS specific in an OS specific manner or into a SQL table. We talk about perhaps introducing the modern APM monitoring tools. So in the Azure stack, we have something called App Insights, which allow us to capture telemetry from all dependencies of your application. So yeah, just some of the typical activities. Then the next choice really is about, so what's a good target for my application in Azure? And for the Azure PaaS services, platform as a service, we've got 4 candidates here we can talk about for this session. So on the left, app service or Azure Spring Apps. These services give you a fully managed language runtime. So if you can imagine everything, including the language runtime, whether that be Java or .NET, is managed and delivered for you by the platform. So all of the lifecycle management and upgrading of that language runtime, everything below it, the operating system, the virtual machine, the infrastructure, the hardware, that's all taken care of. So this, if you like, is a good target for those kind of evergreen requirements that need to offload those requirements up to the cloud platform. It has built-in ingress, scaling, deployments, and although these do support containers, you don't need to containerize your applications. So You don't necessarily have to go and produce Docker files or container registries or scanning and those types of activities. So it's a nice, quick way of getting going. Container apps and AKS is the options on the right. So these are both our container platforms, which essentially abstract away your code from the hoster to give you a nice level of abstraction there in the container. AKS is our fully blown managed Kubernetes version that runs upstream Kubernetes, which is a vendor-independent solution, which is really nice for organizations to give them the ability that their application workloads will become then very migratable, cloud agnostic, and a lot of scaling benefits around that as well. But it can be quite complicated. There's a lot of options to decide. And then container apps, which I think is our most recent service. So this gives a lot of the benefits of AKS, i.e. a managed container platform with microservice style scaling, but it removes a lot of the complexity about running a cluster. So it really abstracts away the whole cluster management and operations from you, giving you a pure managed container platform. So we're getting a lot of adoption around container apps because of its simplicity. So I'm just going to give you a quick example give you a flavor of what this looks like. In this scenario, we're going to be following some guidance that we've published around modernizing an old .NET application, an ASP.NET application, up into AKS. So, and I'll show you some collateral around that. On the right-hand side of this slide, we've got what a fully kind of greenfield modern app maybe look like that may be your final target that goes into like a full microservices environment. It uses a number of managed services and lots of different components of that application all working together to provide independent scaling, independent deployment, and delivery to the app. So I'm going to pull up my dev box. So I do a lot of my Windows demonstrations and development on a dev box, which is a Microsoft capability to allow me to offload all my development into a managed environment. So the first thing I'm going to pull up is this is the project we're going to clone. So this is part of the documentation around modernizing an existing ASP.NET app. So this Git repo gives you a lot of examples of a legacy solution and what the modernization equivalent would look like. So what those refactoring efforts would need to look like. And
this is public that anyone can go access, right, Keith?
Yeah, that's right, Tyke. So these links we can share later on that you can go and have a look at.
Great.
As part of this repo, there's also a really good detailed wiki in here. So this wiki gives you a lot of good information about the steps to go through to do those refactoring efforts in an example way. So we can follow these areas to get an idea of what that would look like for your code base. So if we go back to here, so I'm going to pull that up in Visual Studio. So all we've done here is clone this down to Visual Studio and opened it as normal as a project. So this is one of the legacy web forms applications. So you can see here it's ASP type application running on an older framework. And one of those Visual Studio tooling capabilities that you get with VS Code now is the ability to right-click on your project. You may not be able to see this; it's very small, but there's an add option where you can add Docker support to your project. What this will do is it will ensure that you've got all the required Docker libraries on your machine, so you can do that local inner loop with Docker, and it will create a Docker file in your project as well, so that you can containerize this application, and you get the ability then to actually run that Docker file, and there's a lot of good integration between Visual Studio and Docker. So if I was to open Docker Desktop on my local machine, I can see that having added that Docker support and run that and executed that on Visual Studio, I've got a Docker container locally on my desktop, which I can then open up into the browser, and I can see that that example application is fully operational inside of that Docker container. Okay, so that's the first step of Dockerizing. So obviously, there's a lot of if you were using perhaps integrated authentication before, you want to change the way the application is monitoring, or do other pieces of work to modernize it to make it work really well, then this is the time where we'll go ahead and do that and use that wiki and some of the output of the assessment tooling in Azure Migrate to make those changes. Once you're happy with the container, then we can start to deploy this into our AKS cluster. So as part of Visual Studio, I've created this repo. I've cloned it locally to one of my repos, and I've added an actions file to do that deployment. So let me show you here. So as you can see, this is my copy of the legacy web forms project, which is the one I'm interested in. I've done those Docker changes in Visual Studio, and I've pushed that up to this repo. But then I've also added a GitHub action, which is an automated build process to build the container and deploy it to my AKS dev cluster. So I can just go into this to give you a bit of an understanding of what that looks like. If you haven't come across actions before, it's a great tool to give you that automated build and deploy process. So first step here is we'll do a NuGet restore, which is the dependency management platform for .NET. This could be a Maven restore or NPM or pip or whatever language we're dealing with. Then we've got a build process. So we're running MS Build, which is again the build tool for the full framework.NET apps. Then we're doing the Docker piece. So we're logging into Docker, building the container and pushing it. And if you see, we're using the GitHub run number to tag our container, so we can be very specific about the release that we're using. Then down here, we're deploying that to AKS. So the other good thing about actions is you can come in here and see if your action has succeeded. It's got a full audit trail, and you can see all of the logs that it's produced to make sure that everything is run successfully. And you can see all the outputs of those logs in this audit trail. So that, I'll show you where that will end up. So I'm going to flick over now into my Azure portal. So I'll make this a little bit bigger. So I have a Kubernetes service deployed in here. So I've chosen to go to Kubernetes because we've already got workloads in production in Kubernetes, and that's our strategic platform of choice. So what the GitHub action will have done is created the container in Azure Container Registry, which then AKS will pull from to deploy into the cluster. So I'll just show you the container registry first. Look at the repositories. And we can see I've got my Modernize Full Framework Web Forms project, and I've got all my GitHub build numbers where I've built and tagged and deployed that container into Container Registry. Then just moving to AKS. So this is Azure Kubernetes Service. So one thing that's I just want to highlight here is if I go into node pools. So node pools is the underlying infrastructure that Kubernetes manages. I can see I've got two node pools currently running, one with an operating system of Linux and one with an operating system of Windows. So I can be more specific on that. So if I pull out my command line here, hopefully Hopefully I can make it a bit bigger. In order to talk to this cluster, we can use the kubectl command line, and we can look at each individual machine by saying get nodes and look at the operating system that they're running. And what you'll see is we've got 2 Ubuntu nodes, and we've got 1 Windows Server data center node. And we've created that just by simply adding those node pools into AKS. Our Windows Container team have done a lot of work with Windows containers in 2022. So this is the default operating system now when you add a Windows node pool to AKS. And it means that those Windows containers are getting more efficient, they're getting smaller, that they're able to start quicker and getting better compatibility. So there's been a lot of engineering that we've done to make that a viable production platform. So that's the node pools. Then if I go into my workloads that's been deployed into the cluster, so these are all of the workloads we've currently got. You can see I've got my FX web form workload. So this is the workload that's deployed the container. At the moment, I've got 1 pod running. So if I want, I could have, just with a single command, I could launch another 5 or 6 pods and have that all load balanced for me in AKS. This is the real benefits of AKS, is the ability to scale across those node pools, to be able to give you high availability across multiple instances. That's all now baked into this. The other piece is you don't have to do any preparation on these machines. Everything you need is baked into that Docker file. So there's no pets where you have to perform pre-install operations or anything like that. So I can drill into my pod here. So again, my pod has a container. Drill into that one further. And then we can actually see the image tag here, which we can see is using that GitHub 44 tag. So we can see exactly what version is run, and we can trace that back to the pipeline where it's run from. So just to finish that off, then I can go to. I think I created a service along with this. So to expose your application out of AKS, you need to create either a service or an ingress, which will expose that then so that we can go and hit it. At the moment, I've just created a load balancer service with an external IP in this case. So I can just go and hit that external IP and get the same catalog experience that we got running locally. So that kind of gives you an idea of the code changes to make, of that inner loop process, and then the automated deployment. So now we've got a container version of our app that we can deploy onto multiple services. It's very, very portable. It's been modernized with modern auth, with modern monitoring. It's been upgraded to the latest long-term support framework, and it's being run on the managed service in AKS, which gives you a scalable platform where you can scale your workloads. So quite a few steps involved, but you could see these are options for where you can have very minimal code changes to make a big improvement in your operations and deployment of the application. The next steps is you can go further on and start to strangle out capability, functionality, or add new functionality. But maybe you want to use the newer .NET Core framework, and you can then run those microservices on the Linux node pool next to the Windows node pool and have the routing set up between them so that the customer is routed to the right service. So you've got a lot of kind of strangler pattern options for modernizing, strangling out functionality onto a new tech stack, using new languages, and even more efficient, smaller images. So I think that's all I wanted to show in that side. So I'll flick back to my slideshow. So yeah, just a good a good example there. Just one example, we could have gone directly to app service, where we wouldn't need to containerize our app, and we could just deploy that straight to app service, but still making those modernizations when necessary. That would mean you wouldn't need to deploy that, and yeah, or you could take it all the way to a fully modern architecture. So yeah, that's all I have for you today. We built up a lot of experience in doing this over the last couple of years. So thanks for watching, and hopefully you'll have your own journey and be able to make use of some of this new technology.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Keith, for bringing us through that demo and showing us the capabilities, particularly that AKS side. I think if you were to show app service or container apps, it's quite a smooth process. A lot of people can get used to it. And so going into that detail in the AKS, where sometimes there's a bit more complexity, as you mentioned, hopefully that'll really help people. Before we jump into some of the questions, and Asta, you have a couple that you've seen. I just wanted to ask around that AKS side of things. If someone's looking to get started and learn AKS, looking to see how they can deploy some of their own container images to AKS, are there any good resources that people should go to?
Yeah, no, good question. So it can be a bit daunting if you're brand new to Kubernetes. There's a new way of thinking about deploying. There's a set of deployment metadata and objects like pods and deployments and ingress and services to become familiar with. There is a lot of good learning collateral on the Microsoft websites. We signpost quite a lot of good links around getting started as a beginner into AKS. One of our distinguished engineers, Brendan Burns, has done a lot of great videos on a series of YouTube videos on coming up to speed and introducing some of those concepts. And we have other events as well to if you want to get up to speed with those areas. So yeah, there's a lot of learning out there, but it can be give yourself some time, because it can take a while if you're brand new to it.
Great. Asta, do we have any questions that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I do. Let's start with this one over here. So a question: can we target AKS and app service for our modernization program?
Yeah, thanks, Asta. Yeah, no, that's a great question. Absolutely. So we do see a lot of companies actually using both technologies. So if you have an application that's running really well today, it's maybe an end-tier application, and it's going to stay that way. And really, the quickest path to modernize that and to evergreen that into Azure is app service. It gives you a lot of tooling and ability to get those apps up and running really quickly and show value right out of the gate. And other applications, maybe they're more targeting a more microservice-based framework in the future. So maybe there's going to be a strangler pattern to pull out multiple services and add different services to it over time. And you need more independent control of scaling around those services. So those will go onto AKS or container apps really well. You'll get all of that control and scaling independence. Plus, we can run many workloads within these clusters to get really good efficiency of your underlying compute costs and your cloud costs. And so, yeah, we see customers use both strategies, and depending on the app and the requirements, go either one or the other.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. Can we target AKS and app service for our modernization program?
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry, I probably answered that one in the previous one. So yeah, both are absolutely good candidates. We also have Spring apps for Java that we're seeing a lot of traction around now. We're seeing a lot of companies using Spring apps for their Java modernization programs, where again, Spring apps gives you that full platform management all the way up to the JVM. So we manage the JVM for you and all of the underlying infrastructure that sits underneath it. Yeah, it really is a case of selecting the most appropriate technology for the most appropriate workloads and putting together an architecture around that. So, thanks.
Perfect. So also, how do we decide what target services that we should be using?
So I think it goes back to perhaps the previous question, just around my previous answer, just around looking at the nature of the application, whether you need what the language runtime requirements are first of all. So whether and that will dictate a lot of the time whether you can use these language runtime managed services or whether you want to go to the container route. And then after that, it's about how much control do you need around deploying multiple services, independent scaling, that kind of full cluster capability. And if you need that full cluster capability and you've already got a good Kubernetes practice, then AKS is a great choice. If you need that capability but don't have the Kubernetes service yet, then Container Apps is a good choice. And then if you want that fully managed language runtime, then App Service or Spring Apps. So there's a service in there for everyone. I think it's a case of just having a look at the docs and getting to the right service.
Perfect, thank you. And our last question we have is, do you have any recommendations when modernizing services to serverless function apps on the best ways to monitor the CPU performance of those apps, services, etc.?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for that. So one of the nice things about functions and app services, it does have a lot of monitoring capability built into the platform. It's a high level PaaS service. So there's a lot of ability to it's got very good integration into a service called Application Insights that can give you really detailed analysis about how the application is performing and also how the underlying PaaS platform is performing as well. The other thing app service and functions give you is the ability to scale. So it will, a lot of the time, it will, certainly for functions, it will monitor its own resource usage and it will scale out as needed to make sure that we're keeping the performance profile of that application. And with app service as well, you're able to set scaling rules based upon all of those telemetry and metrics that we store. So yeah, have a look at the documentation around those two products. They've got great built-in monitoring capability, and have a look at that application insights integration to get that real deep insight into what your app's doing.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Keith, for answering those questions, and thanks everyone for putting questions into the chat to ask Keith. That pretty much brings an end to our Q&A side of things. So once again, thank you. Keith, thanks again for that session, jumping into that demo for us, running through the slides. If people are interested in similar sessions, looking at some of these app refactoring, you can go ahead and look at Sam Elanisa's session on LunchBytes. He looked at some of those, particularly some of the tools that we use for migrating some of these applications. And so that's a good one to jump into. Same thing as David Abrocchi, who looked at .NET work as well on our LunchBytes. So if you want to go ahead and look at that, you can go to aka.ms/lunchbytes to see our full list of all the episodes that we've done. So thank you, Keith, once again for joining us. And we're going to jump into the last few bits of that session.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, Asta, do you want to take us away?
Yeah, of course. So as usual, we have our Cloud Skill Challenge for the session today. So feel free to use the link that we've provided. And also, if you have anything or any notes, please feel free to reach out to us on our email. So lunchbytes@microsoft.com. And you can kind of follow up and learn some more there as well. And also, we have our community callouts. So if you have any communities in your local area, feel free to get together and also find the tech information in your local areas as well.
Great. Well, thanks, Asta. Thanks, everyone, for joining today's session. Once again, please do visit some of those links to find those local communities. Go ahead and challenge yourself with that Cloud Skills Challenge. It's a great opportunity to learn about some of the things we have. And Microsoft Learn is a great platform as well, with plenty of different learning modules. So you can get your certifications as well through the Microsoft Learn platform. So in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be jumping into how to scale with Azure functions with Mark Graham. So we're going to be looking at functions themselves, durable functions, sort of a fan out kind of pattern, something I think is really beneficial for a lot of enterprises who look to really scale some of their applications, but want to run it with code that they can just run serverlessly without any need for looking at infrastructure and that sort of challenge that sometimes that has. So please do join us in 2 weeks' time on April the 5th, our usual time of 12 p.m. GMT, and we shall see you then. Thanks for joining, everyone.